Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. Weekend is almost upon us. Just a heads up though, tomorrow's video will be more geopolitics focused. Today's video will be more macroeconomic focused. And we will also look at the lockdown situation too. But first up, the economy, and let's start with the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region before moving to the mainland. According to a Census and Statistics Department report published yesterday, Hong Kong's unemployment rate surged to a comparatively high by local standards, 5.4% for the 3 months through April, as the city's COVID restrictions continued to weigh down on the economy of the city, higher than the 5% rate expected by economists in a Bloomberg survey. The underemployment rate rose to 3.8% from 3.1%. We remember last week the Special Administrative Region government downgraded its annual growth forecast to a range of 1 to 2% from a previous expectation of 2 to 3.5%. Economists argue that COVID restrictions, rising interest rates worldwide, struggling exports due to China's lockdowns, more on this shortly, and higher global commodity prices have all contributed to Hong Kong's worsening economic conditions. Now moving from Hong Kong to the mainland, we learned yesterday from a General Administration of Customs GAC statement that China's imports of natural gas dropped 19.6% year on year to 8.1 million tons in April. Imports of liquefied natural gas fell 34.5% year on year, both naked evidence of the damage to economic activity the lockdowns have caused in April. Though part of the drop in imports was driven by surging prices, the average price of imported liquefied natural gas was up 87% year on year. China, of course, is a major coal user and importer of oil. However, in 2021, China also overtook Japan as the world's largest importer of liquefied natural gas. Energy security is a huge vulnerability for the country. Okay, up next for the economy, we are starting to get an idea of the massive cost of the stimulus required to save an economy in freefall, as one Nanjing official was recently reported as describing it. Yesterday, Bloomberg's Hong Kong team published calculations of monetary and fiscal measures announced so far to bolster growth in the Chinese economy. The team conservatively concluded that stimulus alone will see an incredible $5.3 trillion pumped into its economy this year. That's almost 1/3 of official GDP. The analysts argue that because this amount is still smaller than 2020's total stimulus, and because the Shanghai lockdown is much more disruptive than the Wuhan lockdown back in 2020, thus much more stimulus is likely to be announced later this year. Indeed, most of the stimulus was announced at the annual session of the National People's Congress in early March, well before most of the lockdowns. We remember from earlier this week too that Li Keqiang called for more stimulus on top of previous efforts. We also remember from last week that most local special bonds have already been used for financing infrastructure. So, and this is me saying this, not Bloomberg, we should not be surprised if stimulus balloons to $8 to $10 trillion this year. David Chu, China economist at Bloomberg Economics, observed on this finding, quote, "The mainstay of policy this year is fiscal spending and government investment. While the central bank is only playing a supportive role so far, there's still a lot of space for a stronger fiscal policy, which is more effective in supporting growth now." End quote. So how did this team get to this number? On the fiscal side, they added China's general budget expenditure with the amount of money issued through local government special bonds and tax and fee cuts. Each of these we have explored individually over the past week or so. Bloomberg calculations on the monetary policy support side includes liquidity unleashed by the central bank, the People's Bank of China, through policy loans, cuts to the reserve ratios for banks, and subsidized loans. Analysts point out that the massive stimulus this year will likely still be much smaller as a percentage of GDP than what was unleashed in response to the global financial crisis in 2008. mostly because China simply doesn't have the room to be more aggressive anymore. In 2008, China's debt to GDP was very modest, whereas now it's some of the highest levels in the world. Since then, debt has exploded with credit and new issues were created, like the over-leveraged housing market, for example, which we can see China still wrestling with today. Also in 2008, interest rates were higher, with less fears of runaway inflation domestically like we're seeing now. Okay, next up, the outbreak and lockdown situation. If you guys are enjoying the video, don't forget to hit the like button, and for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help keep this channel sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, which is useful if you just want to give a one-off tip, links are in the description below. As always, thank you everybody for the ongoing support. Let's start with the capital, Beijing, which is still fighting a small scale but stubborn outbreak of COVID, with officials and residents alike hoping that Beijing can avoid a devastating Shanghai-style lockdown. New official cases remain in the dozens, but are slowly inching up. Work from home orders remain in place for large parts of the city, and some areas are in lockdown. For example, yesterday, Thursday, 5 universities in the Liangxiang college town in Beijing's Fangshan district were placed under strict lockdown according to local authorities. Hundreds of students and faculty at the schools have been sent to central quarantine. Also, we learned about 20 minutes ago before recording this that the district of Fengtai in Beijing is going into what is a de facto state of lockdown immediately. So this is a developing story, but yes, it looks like this district, quite a large district in, I believe, the southwest of the city, is going into a form of de facto lockdown, but of course they're not calling it lockdown. Let's move our attention now to Shanghai. The situation has stabilized this week in the megacity, rhetorically at least. Progress is being made towards opening the city, unless of course there is a nasty resurgence in cases. As of this morning, officially there were no new cases found in the community. However, unofficially, there have been claims that authorities continue to find some new cases within some communities, and as such, there will be some residential compounds that will be unable to open up straight away. Then, this afternoon, 3 cases were officially recognized as community infections in one district. However, so far, other districts have not been affected. Authorities have not lifted the lockdowns, and they don't look to be lifting them immediately. Millions still remain in their homes. The policy appears to be to gradually ease restrictions until the start of next month. We are seeing some of this gradual easing already this week. Residents at housing compounds across Shanghai have been given passes that allow one person from each household to go out for a few hours at a time. Some residents have been given permits to leave Shanghai, a modest, very modest easing of movement restrictions. Some domestic flights were reopened on Monday too. Some shops, some were allowed to open back up this week too. However, most small and medium enterprises in Shanghai still face difficulties reopening. Only a small number of companies have resumed operations, as many do not meet the pandemic prevention requirements. According to local officials, transport service on some main subway lines and 273 bus routes will resume covering the central urban areas of the city, the airport, the railway stations and hospitals from this Sunday, though a negative COVID test will be required to use this public transportation. This week too, the China Foreign Exchange Trade System, Shanghai Stock Exchange and Shanghai Futures Exchange, and many other major financial institutions or bodies were put on a whitelist of companies allowed to resume work. Now, these are all positive signs for the millions of frustrated residents of Shanghai who remain in lockdown, hoping that this isn't just political theatre. Things are not as positive for other parts of the country, however. Cases in the major northern port city of Tianjin, about an hour from Beijing, continue to creep up. In Sichuan, in the southwest of the country, the poor provincial level city of Guang'an, population 1 million, may be close to announcing a citywide lockdown. Meanwhile, a domestically produced oral and antiviral drug, that is a COVID pill, VV116, co-developed by a Jiangsu-based firm and the government through the Chinese Academy of Sciences, is now undergoing phase 3 trials. It is hoped that it can be used to treat Omicron patients with mild and moderate symptoms. Now let's end this discussion with this observation today by China finance expert Michael Pettis. Quote, According to a Ministry of Commerce spokesperson, the impact of the virus on consumption is temporary, as the strong resilience and sound long-term development fundamentals of China's consumption remain unchanged. I don't think most analysts in China would agree.